I forgot I was charging my iPad in the other room. I forgot to grab it.
Let me just hit this so I can minimize this. Get that in the background. And then, let me just do this. Give me a 1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, cool.
Good? Okay.
Yeah. My, the mixer I use, I went through a period a year or so ago where for whatever reason, I couldn't, like I was having trouble getting guests audio. I don't know. And then the whole thing died and they had to replace it, and it's been fine ever since, but I'm still a little paranoid. Okay.
Yeah, don't blame me.
Well, where did that go? Still learning how to use it.
You're live, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
It's all. I don't mind the behind the scenes stuff.
Okay.
It's just my little YouTube page that just don't say anything, Okay, here we go. I'm still, I grew up a Windows guy and I'm still learning how to use Mac. So it's like sometimes I just can't find stuff. All right. So I got the schedule pulled up and I got the box score. All right.
Okay, cool.
All right. Here we go. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Welcome back to the Field Goals podcast, everyone. I am Dan Viennes. I am joined by my co-host, Dayna O'Gorman. It is the morning after Seahawks open their season with a 17-16 win. That in and of itself doesn't sound too weird, right? But when you consider everything that goes into it and went into it, and geez, we've been talking about this for what seems like ages, it's not just any win. The Seahawks beat the Russell Wilson-led Denver Broncos at Lumen Field 17-16 to open the season. Dayna, how are you? Have you recovered yet? Did you get any sleep last night?
I did not get much sleep last night, just simply because, I admit this to most people. Most people know this about me. There are certain games every year that I don't watch because I get hyper anxious about them. And so I watch them on and off and have to take a break and go back and forth. This was that game for me this year. Yeah. And I turned around at the end of the game. My brother, who lives in Denver and is a huge Broncos fan, and I were texting. It's okay. He's so happy that they might beat the Chiefs. That's all he cares about.
Couples at the game last night.
Yeah. And I was at the end. I saw he's like 1 point. I'm like, God, we lost by 1 point. That's instantly what you think, right? Yeah. And turned around, the Seahawks had won. And so I was up until about 1:30 last night rewatching the entire game. So it was so fun to watch. It felt like a Seahawks game, didn't it? Like it felt like a Seahawks win, taking it down to the last second. But the whole game just had such a Seattle feel to it. It was great.
And not just a Seahawk feel, but a Pete Carroll feel. I mean, this was, and there's fans today that probably hate the way we won that game, if that makes any sense, because there's a lot of fans out there, you've heard from them, that aren't big fans of Pete Carroll and his style of football and blames him. There's people I know personally that blame him for Russ wanting out. And that's obviously one of the storylines we're going to follow over the next couple of years. It's Belichick Brady all over again. Who succeeds more? Who's better off after the breakup, right? But this was exactly how Pete Carroll likes to play a football game. Well, with one small disclaimer that we'll get into. This is the Pete Carroll blueprint, right? This is exactly the way they saw this going.
It is. And this is what they've been wanting to do for a while. But when you have a quarterback of Russell Wilson's caliber, you just can't really do it. Now, we saw a lot of it last year with the defense playing so well, especially toward the end of the season. And we see that carrying over. And oh my God, Clint Hurt. I loved the way he drew everything up. That defense was aggressive. It was so fun. But Pete looked like he was having a good time on the sidelines. The whole team does. Now, Pete always looks happy. Let's give him that. But It was just different. There was a spark. And I think it's because they knew they had a good game plan for Russ. They knew how to exploit the weaknesses of Denver, and they executed it well. Were there some first game hiccups? Of course. We saw that all weekend long with every team. But this went, I think, as well or better than they could have expected.
It's funny that when you talk about Pete knowing Russ, and we talked about that on the show last week and played that sound from him where he said that, we have more information on him than anybody. And he seemed excited at the time to be able to put that into use. It was funny as I'm watching the game unfold. On one hand, I'm thinking, man, in some ways, this is the Russell Wilson that the Seahawk fans we always wanted to see. He was getting the ball out really quick, right? He was throwing screen passes better than he's ever thrown them.
I
And
know, where'd those come from?
we can talk about whether that was design or whether that was him. He was throwing, he was distributing the football, and the offense looked efficient. But Pete Carroll was able to take away the deep shot. There was the one ball that obviously the touchdown to Jerry Jeudy that Kobe Bryant was in position, didn't quite make the play. And then I think it was Josh Jones that took the bad angle and missed the tackle. But that was the only quote unquote deep shot he took the whole game. All that talk about the let Russ cook year and how two high safeties, and he struggled against that. That's what they played against him. That's exactly what they did, and he wasn't able to take those shots, even though he's got that receiving core. It was odd. It was an odd Russell Wilson game, wasn't it?
It was. It felt like an early season Russell Wilson game to me. This is the Russ we've seen, other than that kind of anomaly last year where he started out so fast. And they look so good right away. This has been the Seattle MO for a while. And to be honest with you, he looked like he was playing a Seattle game, but that's what he knows. So it's logical, right? That's the way he would play. What was interesting to me is you could definitely tell that this is a new team for him, that he doesn't quite have that chemistry built up with his receivers that he did in Seattle. Understandably so. I mean, I don't feel bad for Russell Wilson with his $250 million, but what I do feel bad about is the expectation that was put on him by the Broncos fans and media, to be quite honest with you, of he was going to come in and save the world. You got to give him a minute. You'd have to give any quarterback a minute to settle into that.
Well, and that's why I thought ever since I saw it on the schedule that the Seahawks had a shot to win this game. Mm-hmm. I mean, I didn't come out and make any bold predictions or insist they were going to win it, but I think being right out of the gate was the best time to get Russell. And I saw a stat yesterday, you may have seen the same one. Teams with quarterbacks who did not play a snap in the preseason went 3-8 week one. Right. Like, you're talking a brand new head coach who's never coached before in the NFL, has very limited play calling experience, actually. And then a quarterback new to a system, and then this whole hybrid hierarchy that they had put together where Russell was really outspoken about his input in the offense and calling plays and what they're doing on the field. And they didn't do any of that in game situations in the preseason. To go out and be sharp week one was a lot to ask. And it seemed like that. It seemed like a first-year head coach trying to figure stuff out, especially at the end of the game. And we'll get to that in a minute. I thought it was the Seahawks' best shot if they came out and played a clean game. And I think considering how many young guys played yesterday, that's my biggest takeaway, other than Geno Smith, which we'll get to, was just, for the most part, how clean of a game they played.
It really was. We even saw the rookie tackles. They had one penalty between the two of them, that hold on Abe Lucas. It was
questionable.
Yeah, it was. But I will say this. Oh my God. Cross had to go against Chubb the entire game. And it wasn't until the very end of the game where you could see they were kind of all getting worn down and tired. Understandable. Week one, right? And then Chubb kind of got past him. But oh my God, they looked so good and they played well. And they weren't the rookie mistakes. Maybe Cross got all of his penalties out in preseason, which we can hope.
True.
Yeah, but at the same time, it was so wonderfully done. I will tell you this, to your point about getting this game done early. I put a tweet out last night right after the game, and I said, thank God that game is over, because we can move on now. And that's truly the way I feel about it. I'm so glad they played him week one. We got this done, and we can move on from it. Talk about other things after we do our recaps, obviously, but move on and then let it be, instead of letting it hang over our heads until week 10 or something, when we'd be constantly talking about this. So the beauty now is that we can watch this team develop without the Russ returning hanging over their head. And to the same point for the Broncos, they got this done and they can move on and worry about the rest of their division, which is going to be very good this year.
I'm glad you brought up Charles Cross. Rewatching the game, I spent a lot of time watching the TV version and looking at the two tackles. And And you're right. And the thing that impressed me the most about Cross, I mean, first of all, Lucas looked like a 10-year veteran. I mean, there were no issues with what he did out there. And even the moments that Cross looked like a rookie, as you said, second half against one of the elite pass rushers in the league. And they left him. This shows you how much they trust him. Really left him on an island. They weren't helping out. They weren't sticking Will Dissly over there next to him. You know, there were guys chipping, but for the most part, they left him out there. And Chubb made some adjustments, started widening his splits a little bit, and came at him from a different angle. It's only going to make Cross better. I think you couldn't have asked for a better first game from those two guys. Let's talk about our quarterback. This is what, well, first of all, the numbers. Geno Smith, 23 out of 28, 195 yards, 2 touchdowns. If you believe in passer rating, what was his passer rating? His QBR was 69 points.
I think his passer rating was like 107 or something.
I thought I had it here. I cannot find it right now. Yeah, but it was better than Russell Wilson's, that's for sure.
Right.
17 out of 18 in the first half, and then it was kind of hang on through the second half. Here's what Pete Carroll had to say about Geno Smith after the game.
How about Geno? Geno played tonight like he's been playing the whole time we've been practicing. That's what he's been looking like. He didn't look any different than what he's looked like in practice. And so that's why we had the belief in him, and that's why he was able to win the job and go out there on Monday Night Football and win a football game.
So I'm not afraid to admit when I'm wrong. And we talked on our first show together about how I was disappointed in the decision to go with Geno Smith, not because I didn't think they could win with Geno Smith. And I've since come to realize that he was the smartest choice to start, especially this game. I just thought it'd be more fun to have Drew Lock out there. I was looking at the season from a different light. That light has changed now. And part of the reason is because Geno Smith looked like a professional quarterback out there. He looked like Alex Smith, right? I mean, this is exactly what, and Pete emphasized this. He used the word practice 3 times. I mean, this is what we've seen in practice. That's how he won the job. So much focus was placed on the preseason games. And yeah, he had a lot of drops and things like that. But his preseason seemed a little mundane overall. But it was what was happening in practice during the week that convinced Pete Carroll and Shane Waldron and all the guys there that he was the right guy. And he sure looked the part. The moment wasn't too big for him. He looked like a pro.
He was ready. And I think that, and it was brought up multiple times last night. I think Joe Buck brought it up at one point where, you know, they would keep saying he's been in the system. He's been around. Right. So he knows what the expectations are. But this offense looked different last night. And it looked like it was completely geared toward Geno's strengths. We didn't see any of the weird Russell Wilson spin outs, which we saw once in preseason. I was like, do not do that again. But then, and we saw that, and the tight end usage. Yeah. The Broncos' plan seemed pretty clear to me. They were going to absolutely stuff the box and stop the run. They figured Pete Carroll would run that ball all day long, and then they were going to maul DK Metcalf to death so that he couldn't be in any issue. What they forgot is that this is a completely different system. They had left those tight ends wide open how many times? Why? Because Russ never used the tight ends. I don't know if it just didn't occur to him that maybe they would use him now that he's gone. I don't know. But it just looked different. It felt different. And Geno looked so comfortable in it. And I think that is going to be one of the biggest things that's going to come out of this year. Will they have an explosive offense? Probably not, to be quite honest with you. It's not like, they expect Geno to be up there with all, the like Mahomes and all of those with their passing and everything. But what they are expecting for him is to run the offense the way they want it to. And they then in turn will give him what he needs to succeed.
Yeah, all of that. I think one of my biggest takeaways last night watching the offense operate was the tight end usage. And Geno spread the ball around too. DK had his 7 catches, but only for 36 yards. Some of those tough, beastly catches. The tight ends accounted for 8 catches. So 30% basically of the completions in that game went to the tight ends. I love the formations. I love that they used all 3 of them at the same time, multiple times. I'd love to see a snap count on that. I love that Colby Parkinson's skill set was finally put to use. I love some of the weird, I don't know what you'd call those formations. I need to talk to an X and O person with the tight end and the back in the backfield and 2 backs. So it almost looked like they were going to run a triple option or a wishbone of some kind. A lot of creativity. And you wonder, is that something that they wanted to do last year, but Russell didn't like it? Or is it something that they're doing this year because Russell's not there and they're just trying to be more creative? But it was a lot of fun to watch, and he seemed like he was in command, and he seemed like a guy that was more creative and improvisational than maybe I thought he had in him.
I think you're right. But we have to remember, we only saw him in limited time last year with no, in practice. It's never like he took over the ones from Russ. That didn't happen. And so he just kind of had to step in and fill in. And so now we're getting to see, Geno Smith after a full offseason being right there in the mix with everything. I think that that's going to be huge. Again, I am not saying that Geno Smith is going to be an elite quarterback. But if they get what they need out of him, it's a little bit different than necessarily, he could even exceed that. But even if they just get what they need out of him, he could win them some games.
The other guy that he kind of reminded me of as I was watching him is Ryan Tannehill. What we saw from him after he left Miami, threw a bunch of interceptions in his 4 years there, went to Tennessee, became a more efficient quarterback. And was a guy that wouldn't go out really and win you games, but that you could win games with. And I think with this formula, now I want to finish talking about performances last night, but then we're going to take what we learned last night and apply it to the Seahawks schedule and kind of talk about how we think the season might unfold. You talked about defense early on, and it was definitely the story of two halves last night. First half looked like there were a lot of issues in coverage. Looked like Russell, they really had a game plan, a lot of misdirection, really taking advantage of, I think, what they expected to be an aggressive defensive game plan from the Seahawks. And it seemed to be finding some holes, picking on the young corners a little bit. But the second half was all about turnovers and the goal line stands. As a whole, first of all, your overall impressions, a lot of new players, a lot of young players, and a new scheme last night. How'd you feel about how the defense played?
I loved every second of it. I love defense. And this felt, not to be cheesy, because I know Pete just did this whole thing about grit. If you watch the YouTube series from the Seahawks, he did a whole thing about grit. This team felt gritty. It felt like it had an edge to it again, which we haven't seen for a while. And that's what I've always loved about Seahawks defenses. But I will tell you this, it's super impressive to me was the youth of this team. Jamal Adams goes out and Pete called that injury serious, which to me, that means bring up the coffin. The kid is dead, right? Like, we will not see Jamal Adams again this season. But Michael Jackson that he stood up. Tariq Woolen, he was the highest rated rookie this weekend. Did you read that stat?
Yeah.
It was just amazing what he did. And he had no passes, just the one quarterback. But then that defender, when he went back down for that exact same play and he had Judy again and he defended it so well. Oh my God, I loved every second of it. I was so impressed. But that line, they caused some serious havoc and it was so fun to watch. This to me felt like a defense that was ready to go after this quarterback. I think there was a little bit of that element to it. But I also just feel like Clint Hurtt said he was going to make them more aggressive. And we don't always know what that means. That could mean 10 different things, right? And sometimes they played a little soft and sometimes they didn't. But they just went after these players. What that meant, because it's week one, is there were some missed tackles and there was a little bit of confusion sometimes, but you could really see it get together. But this team in the red zone, no coach could ask for more.
Yeah, so much good stuff to talk about. Early on, obviously, there were some, they gave up some big chunks of yardage. And I turned to my buddy next to me and I just said this feels to me like young players playing in a new scheme. And this is the first time the bullets are flying. And the Broncos had a plan. And I thought it was an effective plan. I love the fact that once again, because we didn't see this for a while, that Pete and that staff are, and we talked about this last week, they're willing to play the young guys. And I think the best example of that was, Woolen looked like I expected him to look. I tweeted out before the game that my bold prediction was he would give up a touchdown, but he would also have an interception. I wasn't exactly right, but he did give up some plays, but he also made some plays and looked like a pro and looked like a guy who can handle one-on-one press coverage against good receivers. And at that size, that's exciting. And that's what we all saw from him and got us excited about him as a prospect in the first place. but the trust in him, he gets banged up. I think it was early fourth quarter, takes a shot to the chest when he was defending a run play, coming up in run coverage, goes out of the game. Sidney Jones comes in. But as soon as Sidney Jones is our best corner when he's healthy. And I think there's a question about how healthy he is, even though he was active for the game. He basically didn't play. He comes in for a couple of snaps, but as soon as Woolen's ready to go back in, he goes back in.
Right.
Jones comes back out. Those are the guys that they were going to roll with. And I'm glad you mentioned Jackson, because he seemed like, it was kind of quiet. He didn't really get his name called a lot, but he seemed to be around the ball. He made some great stops in run coverage. Russ didn't seem like he wanted to pick on him too much. He might be the kind of underrated story of the preseason in this first game on defense, is a guy that he might not give that job back.
He might not. And I don't know that Woolen's going to give his job back. Sidney Jones, that play where he just stood there and let that wide receiver run right past him, I was like, what are you doing? He looked so confused, which then did make me question how healthy he really truly was. Yeah. But at the same time, Woolen was that fast, lanky, cornerback that Pete loves. And then you have Jackson on the other side. Both of those, he picked up both those balls, that on the goal line that were fumbled on the goal line. That was him. Now, granted, Nwosu, which we haven't mentioned yet, on fire last night. He looked fantastic. And he had looked not great in preseason, let's be honest. So this was it was so refreshing. But then you have Jones that came in, and he actually looked pretty good too. He didn't do terribly. And it was exciting, because all of us, so many of us in the media and the fans, have just said, we want to see this team develop. We don't expect the playoffs. We don't expect, a Super Bowl. We just want to see these young guys develop. And straight out the gate, you can see their development from the first week of training camp.
Well, and that's exciting to me that this team they have depth. I think there's more depth across the board, offense and defense, but especially in defense, than we've had in years. You remember those years where they were just trying to patch things together behind Cam and Earl before things fell apart, and the Tedrick Thompson experiment and Lano Hill and all those guys. And if one of those guys had to go out of the game, if Cam or Earl had to come out of the game, you were scared. Like, there was no confidence at all that any of those guys could come off the bench and play well. And it was the same thing at corner, like just razor thin depth at corner over those years. And now you feel like there's 5 or 6 guys that could go out there and play. Josh Jones comes in, looks like a vet, made some plays in run coverage, and looks like someone who maybe has that job over Ryan Neal when Neal's 100% healthy, with Adams being out. To me, that bodes well for the future, and it really saved the game yesterday. When I think when Adams went out, it completely changed their game plan. You could see what they were doing with him. They were doing what we talked about earlier. 3 safeties. They were moving him around. He was kind of a hybrid. He played on the play he got hurt on when he was a quarterback pressure, almost got to Russ. He was basically playing middle linebacker and blitzed from that spot. Once he went out, they had to go to more of a kind of a vanilla defensive look with Jones and Diggs playing too high, and they made it work. I thought that was exciting, and I'm glad you mentioned Nwosu. I think he was PFF's highest graded player for us last night. I think it was 90 something. He had a sack, 3 quarterback hurries, a quarterback hit, all over the place. Looked like they were moving him around a lot. Like, we thought Darrell Taylor was going to be our most dynamic defensive player. His name wasn't called last night. Darrell Taylor got bottled up, and I'm not smart enough to be able to watch the tape and see if that was something the Broncos were doing scheme-wise and focusing on him. But Nwosu, they were moving him around as if he's the guy that they're putting in a position to be the dynamic playmaker on defense.
I think it's fascinating the way that they used him. And it was I just had no expectation from him. I just never saw anything in preseason. And I kind of like, he'll be a good filler. I mean, he'll be, run blocker, whatever it is. And he was on fire last night. But can I mention, and I know we're talking about defense, but I want to switch back to offense for 1 second. Oh God, this made me so happy. DJ Dallas's hit on the second half.
Ooh,
oh my God. If that did not feel like a Legion of Boom hit, I don't know what did. And he's freaking DJ Dallas. He's not supposed to hit people like that. Yeah. It was amazing. I was so impressed with him, and not just for that hit, but just kind of his consistency throughout the whole game. But honest to God, it was just like, yep, this is it. They're back to where they need to be. And, we're going to talk about later whether or not we think they can, continue it. Today, I don't care if they continue it. Last night, it felt good to see Seahawks football.
Yeah, let's enjoy this.
Yeah.
And on a short week, we only have to wait 5 more days for another game.
Right.
I like that. That the crowd went nuts. That was a big moment in the second half. The momentum was starting to shift a little bit. The offense was kind of getting bogged down, and that was a big hit from DJ Dallas. And if there are many disappointments from last night, I would have liked to have seen. I know there wasn't a lot to go around. You're right. The Broncos were stacking the box. Penny only had 12 carries. He had the one long run called back because of the Lucas hold call. But I thought, man, I still liked what I saw from Penny. He ran hard. We saw some of the instincts against a tough defense that was stacked up to defend him. And he's not going to get talked about a lot coming out of this game because he didn't score any touchdowns. All the focus is on Geno. But I thought what we saw last night from Rashad Penny, and all the questions about him coming into this year, can he replicate what he did in the last 5 weeks last year? Can he stay healthy? He didn't break any loose. He didn't have that 100-yard game. He wasn't the headliner. But those games, if he stays healthy, those games are going to come because he ran hard last night.
Agreed. I loved what I saw from the run game and the way that they used it because it was expected and not expected. And I think, once again, I'm just repeating myself, but that's what Denver thought was going to happen. So that's what they were prepared for. They were prepared for the run game. When you have a team that is completely prepared for the run game, it's going to be harder for those guys to break loose and to get there. And once again, this is a very young line. And so I think that those holes will come. I think that he'll get there. But man, he didn't give up, clear to the end. And when that run was called back, he just started laughing because he knows, that's just the way football works. But I think we're going to see good things out of him. I'm so excited for Kenneth Walker to get in the mix too, and to see how they use him. I think that the run game will be a staple of this team without question. It's Pete Carroll. But now we know what Geno can do too. It'll be interesting to see what that balance ends up being.
Well, and hopefully this puts to bed the whole Carroll is too conservative idea. When he talked all offseason about how they want to run the football, and that's what they want to base things off of. And after they traded Russell, I think there was a lot of people that were scared we were going to see that Seahawks team from the Dallas playoff game in 2019, and they were going to run to a fault, and they were going to be ultra conservative and run on first and second down and throw on third and long. We didn't see that at all. I mean, they adjusted quickly to Denver handling the run game. 28 pass attempts to 13 rushes, I think kind of says it all. And it just lets you know that this team is going to be adaptable to what's going on in the field and what the defense is giving them. And also, I think it speaks to Shane Waldron's autonomy. This feels like he has control of that offense, and this isn't Pete Carroll like reining him in like he's been accused of doing with other offensive coordinators.
I agree. And why would he? I mean, there's no expectation on them this year, right? Like they realized that they, much like Shelby Harris said, that everyone had written them off and that this game was all about Russell Wilson and they made it about the Seahawks. But he's right. Everyone has written them off. So there's truly no expectation. So give the kid the reins, see what happens. And it worked beautifully last night. I hope they continue. One
other accolade I want to hand out because these guys never get enough credit. But I thought Austin Blythe was one of the keys last night to the offense. We've had so many issues at center over the last few years, and in particular, giving up interior pressure because of that. Like we lived through the Ethan Posick years and Kyle Fuller playing for him, and even when Britt was playing well, that was a weakness of his, and interior pressure was something that really was a problem for Russ. We didn't see any of that last night at all. And we saw this guy getting out 20 yards downfield on run plays. The fumble that he recovered was 20 yards down when Penny gets hit, fumbles the football. Austin Blythe is the guy to recover it because he's down there at the second level. It was a kind of an underrated signing this offseason. There were people that thought we should have made another move for a center. I thought he played great and really stabilized that line.
I did too. I think that pretty much from what I read, people expected him to be fine, for lack of a better word, that he would be fine. And I think that he showed us that he can be more than fine, that he can be a presence there. The entire line even with God love you, Phil Haynes, and your couple of penalties, but they did play well. Geno had a good pocket. He had time. And sometimes he had to step up, into the pocket, and sometimes he should have stepped up in the pocket and didn't. But I just feel like, to me, this is petty. Just forgive me for being petty for a minute. But I was hoping that Russell was watching from the sideline going, that's a great line. What was going on? You know what I mean? Because that was his complaint for so long, when really they did such a beautiful job. I was so nervous about this game, and all of my fears. I feel like I can go into the rest of the season. I don't care if we only win 3 or 4 more games. We've seen what they can do and what they can become, and that to me just feeds my excitement for next year.
And everything's great today, right? Because they won by 1 point. But imagine, right, if McManus hits that field goal, or if they score on one of those goal line stops, Gordon doesn't fumble the ball, it's a whole different story, and we might be shining a light on some of the negatives, right? But when you win, especially in a game with so many storylines like that, everything is positive. And so far, this episode of this podcast is a lot of rainbows and unicorns. But
go ahead.
What did you not like from last night? What concerns you?
The offense in the second half bothered me. There seemed to be some tired legs. There seemed to be some question about some plays here and there. I think Geno obviously was not quite as accurate in the second half. The run game could not get going, and that was a little frustrating to me. I love DK Metcalf, but he's going to end up getting 15 yards. He's running his mouth the way he does. And so I really hope that they can kind of rein that in. It was a big game and we get it. So we're going to let it go this time, DK, but let's calm down a little bit. I think that they have to be able to scheme to get him open a little better, because that's how it's going to be every game for him. They're going to be double teaming him regularly. Now, granted, he was across from Sutton. Sutton is a great player, but still, you have to work with that. On the defense, really, their tackling was not great in the first half, and they really needed to work on kind of wrapping up. I don't know if that's a beginning of the season thing. I don't know if that was an excitement thing or what that was, but hopefully they can get that fixed. So there was definitely some issues with it. It was not a perfect game, and they only won by 1 point. But I will tell you, had they hit that field goal at the end, I think I'd still be as excited about this team as I am, even though they won it, just simply because of what we saw on the field. But that's from an analysis point of view, not necessarily a fan view.
Yeah, it's really, for me, it's hard to take any negatives away from this game. Excuse me, this is my day after a home game voice. Which, by the way, there were times yesterday, I will admit, I had to hold back because I knew I had to do a show today. And so I couldn't scream like I used to at the stadium. It's hard to take any negatives away for me just because of the context, right? And you and I are on the same page on this. There were times last night during the game where I thought to myself, games aren't do or die for me anymore like they were when I was younger. Like life's going to go on. And I felt like I was watching part of a process. Like it wasn't just about this game, and it wasn't about beating the Broncos no matter what. It was like, we're in a process right now. Let's see how this one goes, right? And then we'll take it away and we'll see what happens next week. But that being said, some minor disappointments, I think, over the course of the season. I'd like to see us take some more deep shots. Let's not make DK Metcalf into a possession receiver. Let's take some of those shots, even if they're not there. There was one play late in the game. It was a third down toss. I think it was the one to Lockett. But Geno had, from my vantage point, had Marquise Goodwin wide open on a post for a long touchdown with no safety help at all. Some of those things, I think, as the season progresses, I'd like to see take some of those shots. The other thing is, I've been Jordan Brooks's biggest supporter and supporter of the team taking that player at that spot in that draft. He really struggled in pass coverage at times yesterday, and I know that's kind of been the knock on him. There are people who think he can do that well, that his first 3 years in college, he was asked to do that more, and he did it really well. He's going to need to tighten that up. I thought Cody Barton might have been our best inside linebacker yesterday.
Where did Barton come from?
Played hard, just really took on blockers, had the sack. I think a lot of people are willing to write him off as a guy that we need to upgrade. I thought he played really well last night. And then the other guy, and I know he's your favorite. I don't understand why D. Eskridge is on the roster. He was supposedly healthy. John Schneider talked in the pregame show about how explosive he was. He's excited to see what he can do because he's healthy now and he's their most explosive player in practice, yada, yada. He had one snap. Well, they threw to him once. I think he was in one other time where they kind of faked a jet sweep to him. He had 2 snaps in the whole game. Marquise Goodwin was clearly the number 3 receiver in this offense with 28 snaps, I believe. I don't know what they're doing with Eskridge.
You know what they need to do? They need to trade him for draft picks. But you know what else they need to do? And God help me for saying this out loud. Please don't strike me with lightning. Anyone, Twitter, layback. I think they need to go have a conversation with Odell Beckham Jr. I know it makes everyone a little nauseous, but here's the deal. From what I saw last night, Marquise Goodwin was good. But if this is what we're going to see from teams where they basically try and shut down DK, and then Tyler does what Tyler does well, but you can't expect him to be the only guy all game. They have to get a strong third receiver, and I don't know that that's on the roster right now.
You know, it'll be interesting. It's well known that when OBJ was a free agent last year before he signed with the Rams, that the Seahawks went hard after him. In fact, right. I think he admitted that we offered him more money than the Rams did. He just saw the opportunity to go to the Super Bowl. Supposedly he's healthy now. He's out there. Anyone can have him. He probably wouldn't be that expensive. It'll be interesting to see. You know, what we had talked about last week came to fruition in that, you know, for all of the concern about the back end of that wide receiver group, you know, the tight ends are the focal point of this offense, the tight ends and DK Metcalf. And that certainly was seen last night. But, you know, the more weapons, the better. And a guy like OBJ would certainly be interesting at this point.
Yeah. And I think that's why they're not so concerned about the wide receiver group, is because they plan on using those tight ends. And that's great. And even Noah Fant didn't look bad. I mean, people were worried about Noah Fant. I thought he looked pretty good in the game too. So I think we're going to have to wait and let this shake out for a few games. As we always say over on one of the other podcasts that I do, that it's all shiny on paper. Yeah. But you don't know who a team is until the 4th or 6th game. Mm-hmm. That's when you really know who a team is. And so they're going to let this shake out for a while. But if last night was any indication, they've got to be happy with what they have in front of them.
So speaking of who a team is, what's your take on what happened at the end of that game? How Nathaniel Hackett approached the end of that game and managed the end of that last drive and the decision he made at the end to go for the field goal?
It is completely illogical football-wise what happened. Yeah. And you can watch Peyton Manning losing his mind that they didn't call a timeout. They wasted 30 seconds. I think the probability of that field goal was 6%, but Russ is like 60% on 4th and 5 and less. I don't know. I don't know if they just assumed that he could make. Who assumes someone can make a 64-yard field goal? Like, it's illogical to me. And Hackett in his press conference was livid, but you could tell he was real mad at himself. I don't know if he got talked into it. I don't know what happened, but his voice was shaking. You could tell how upset he was, and he put it all on him. So that's interesting decision-making. Is that a first-year head coach mistake? Maybe, but that's more than poor clock management.
This is why I like, when I go to the games, I like to record them and come home and watch the TV copy. Mm-hmm. Because in the stadium, we're all just assuming, okay, 4th and 5, here's the ball game. We get a 4th down stop, we win the game. There's no way you're not going to let your $265 million quarterback that you just mortgaged the farm for and hitched your wagon to for the next 5 years, who's built a reputation and a career on those moments, you're not going to let him not take that chance. And Brandon McManus has hit some long field goals in his career, but he's missed most. I saw a stat of all the misses from over 56 yards that he's had. It's just the odds of it. I think I saw an analytics site that said there was an 11%, even as good as he is and as strong as he is, there was an 11% chance of him making that field goal. We're talking about marine air here, right? This isn't Denver. But when in the stadium, it felt like they were disorganized. they were going to go for it, but then, things got away from them and they couldn't get set. And so they called the timeout, and then Hackett made the decision. But watching on TV, especially watching that Manning cast clip, it was the plan from the beginning that as soon as the ball went dead, that or once they called the timeout with 20 seconds left, the way Russell walked off the field was like, okay, that's exactly what we were planning on doing. We were going to run the clock down, take a shot to field goal. That was the plan ahead of time. And then Russ said afterwards that he knew he had to get to the 46, I think, to make it, or whatever the yard line was. It's ludicrous to me, and it just speaks to a young coach in the moment. I don't have a better word for it. He choked.
He totally choked.
I can't believe that if he had it to do over again, that he would do it that way. And I also can't believe it, no matter what he said after the game, I cannot believe that Russell Wilson's happy about that.
Oh, God, no. It was almost like they were running the clock down to like 3 seconds. Like there was only going to be 3 seconds left in the game. So even if they had made it, they would have left a little time on the clock for Geno, who doesn't, that's not his specialty. He's not like, 15 seconds with Russ. We might think that, he could probably throw it down the field, but it doesn't matter. It was illogical. And I don't know where the miscommunication was, but there was definitely a miscommunication. And I completely, watching it, I'm like, Russ would have gotten that 5. The way the defense was playing, Russ would have gotten that 5 yards. It would have happened. And it's like, and then give your kicker a better shot, or God, go for a touchdown, whatever you got to do. But it was just illogical. And what was sad to me is that there was a lot of blame from Broncos players and the Broncos fan base putting the blame on the kicker. That is not his job. His job is to kick, but 64 yards is just almost too much to ask of anyone. So I think that that's too bad that he's getting some of that backlash for it. But this is what it comes down to. The 12s made a huge impact last night. And I don't know if that had something to do with it. People can be pissy all they want that they booed him. The logical answer to that is, of course, we will cheer when you put him in the Ring of Honor, because Russell Wilson is going in the Ring of Honor, people. He's going to be there. And then you cheer all you want. But he was in a different uniform, and the booing and blah. Chris Long, if you've ever watched on Twitter Chris Long's refrigerator talk, go watch it. It's hilarious. He called the 12 stone cold killers is what he called them. It was hilarious. But I think there was an impact there. But I don't think that was the only reason for the false starts, for the delay of games. I just think that they're just not quite settled in that offense yet.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought up the reaction thing. I wanted to touch on that. I was shocked. I was shocked at the ratio of it. I knew there'd be some boos. It was 80% boos. Mm-hmm. In that stadium. It was overwhelmingly boos, and it was loud. A little disappointed at that. I mean, my approach to that whole thing, I didn't boo or cheer. I didn't make a peep. I just kind of watched it unfold. Like, sure. The time to cheer Russell again someday will happen down the road. I get it. It's the scorn lover syndrome, right? Like, he didn't want to be here. F him. We're going to let him know how we feel about it. It was, I won't say I was disappointed, because people are going to be how they are and fans are going to fan, but I was shocked by it. And I
have a different take on it, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I don't know that for some people it's going to be scorn lover, but for me, it was exactly what Pete Carroll said. And he got burned for this, but it's logical to me. This is a competitive advantage. You have to get in his head. And we all know Russell, he's usually ice cold and, nothing bothers him, but we've seen a few things that bother him. And that is one of them. Russell, we all know this will be no shock to anyone. He loves to be adored. We get that. So having that pressure just gives you a competitive advantage. Would you have been surprised if Tom Brady had come onto the field and got booed when they ran onto the field? No, I don't think anyone would be surprised at that. Is that the same thing? Yes. Was there more of an edge to it? Yes, definitely. Yeah. But I just feel like the 12s truly take their job seriously in that stadium. And you see it at Arrowhead. You see it at a couple other, venues across the league. And that they were doing what they could to help Seattle win.
You might be onto something. Mookie and I talked about it at the end of last week, what we thought the atmosphere was going to be like. And, as someone who's been a season ticket holder for decades, some fans would take umbrage with this, right? Would be offended by the notion of this, but that stadium hasn't been the same for the last 5 or 6 years.
For sure.
You can see it in the record, but it's just, it hasn't, the sophistication there that you speak of, and maybe what the motivation was to boo him, hasn't been there. And what I mean is, when that stadium was at its best and that home field advantage was making an impact on the field, the best example ever of that is 2005, the NFC Championship game, their first time playing in that game. And Jake Delhomme, I call it the Jake Delhomme effect. He literally could not call the play in the huddle. It was that loud from kickoff to whistle. That had gone away, and you can blame it on people moving here from out of town and all the tech jobs and corporate tickets and things like that, or just getting jaded, being spoiled by winning all the time and expectations changing. But it was different last night, and it felt more like 7 or 8 years ago. And the fans knew it, and they started cheering when the Broncos were in the huddle, and they didn't let up until the end of the play. That's different. That has not been the norm the last few years. And if they can keep that up, then that home field advantage might be back, especially when you kind of look ahead to the schedule. Do you want to do that?
Let's do it.
Want to play some schedule watching? Because doesn't it, first of all, just generally, don't you feel, or do you feel differently now about the next 16 games than you did before the results of this game?
No. Yes and no. Well, here's why. I did a prediction show, and we did every single game, and I had them winning this game. I thought that if anyone is going to beat Russell Wilson, especially a week 1 game, it's going to be Seattle. And so I expected them to win this game. I still expected them to win just 5 to 7 games. Sure. But what I did say, and this is what I believe, is that there's going to be a lot of these type of games, these super close field goal games that Seattle is going to teeter on. They're going to be, okay, do they have enough to push it to the win column? Are they not going to have quite enough, to do that? And last night gave me a little bit of hope that they might tweak some of those closer games, that they might be able to roll over the top of some of those closer games. Do I want them to do that? I don't know, because I still really want a high draft pick. But last night gave me a lot more faith that in those close games, they actually would be able to get up over the top of it. And that's really exciting.
Yeah. And we'll know a lot in 6 days, right? Because so much of what we saw last night might have been the off-field storyline. Like, they've had the entire offseason to focus on this game, to get ready for this game. Russell Wilson coming to town, Monday Night Football, the whole spotlight, everything. Now they got to turn around in a short week and go play a ticked-off 49ers team that lost their first game in a row, and they're 0-1. And we haven't even mentioned, by the way, that the Seattle Seahawks are in first place in the NFC West all by themselves at 1-0. All 3 other teams lost, and all 3 other teams looked bad. You can make the argument right now as we sit here today, the Seahawks might be the best team in the NFC West. Certainly, we think that's going to change. But the 49ers, they're hard to gauge because the conditions of that game, it was just pouring rain. That surface at Soldier Field needs to be outlawed. They shouldn't allow an NFL game to be played on a surface like that. Trey Lance didn't look good, but again, how much of that was the conditions? They're going to be coming home. It's their home opener. You would wonder, here's the thing. I like that we're playing the 49ers in week 2, because if you flip-flop the schedule, we get the Atlanta Falcons at home in week 3. That might be prime for a letdown game where you're coming off the emotion of beating the Broncos, and then you turn around and you play a team that you'd be expected to beat. I'm not so sure about that, but maybe the Niners will bring out the best in them, or might be the ideal matchup for week 2. But gosh, you look ahead. Let's look at these first 6 games. 49ers, then Falcons at home, at Lions. They started off great Sunday, but then looked like the Lions after that. Jared Goff looked like Jared Goff. At New Orleans, they looked pretty good. Arizona at home. Arizona looked terrible. And then you get into Chargers and at Arizona, but you have the Giants sandwiched in there. It's not inconceivable that they could have a winning record now going into the bye, or am I crazy?
I don't think you're crazy.
I mean,
You
you make
hate to get too excited about, one game.
Sure.
But like you, I love that they're playing San Francisco next week because there's not a team on the planet Pete Carroll loves to beat more than the San Francisco 49ers, right? Like
Right.
it's what they own. They for so this it's rock, paper, scissors in the NFC West. The Seahawks beat the Niners beat the Rams, and the Rams beat the Seahawks. It's just the way it works, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that that's going to be it's a good continuation. I think you're absolutely right about that. The rest of those games, there's going to be a letdown eventually. Do I think it'll be against the Falcons? No. Could it be against Lions? Absolutely. To be honest with you, I think that team is way better than people are giving them credit for.
Yeah.
I don't think that they're going to win their division, but they're going to be markedly better than last year.
Yeah.
But I don't know how the Giants won last week. So this week, I don't even know how that happened. But so I think that, yeah, there's going to be some good games. There's going to be, I don't think that there's going to be a blowout loss, but we're going to get a letdown at some point. There has to be a breath taken. And unfortunately, it's probably going to come against one of those teams that we're supposed to beat.
Yeah, and that's, they're young. I mean, it's all going to come back to that. And there's going to be games where that shows. And there's going to be games where Geno Smith's limitations come out, or he has a bad game, or, a team stacks up against the run and shuts us down. It's, to me, though, it all comes back to the process. And this is what is going to be so fascinating about the rest of the season for me, is like, okay, took care of that one. Now we don't have to talk about Russ anymore. Now we can put that in the rearview mirror. Now they got to turn around a short week and go on the road and play the 49ers, who a lot of people think are a playoff team. Let's see how they respond. Let's see what happens. And then you come home and you get, okay, Atlanta at home, a team that most people think we should beat. Their defense is terrible. They're playing a journeyman at quarterback. That's a game we should win. How are they going to handle that?
Mm-hmm.
It's part of the fun for me.
It is. And I really am encouraging fans to look at it that way. Look at, how does this team respond? How do they play? Are they building on what they have? Because that is what's important this year. And I don't want to downplay it. I mean, there are people online being like, you know what, maybe this team is a playoff team and we just didn't know it. Heck, I think, the commentators last night, I can't remember if it was after the game or before the game, said, this is not what we thought we were getting out of Seattle. Well, we're not going to know if that's what we're getting for a few games. And so you're right. The response and how they build on what they have. Do they figure out the tweaks that they need to make? Do they tackle better? Do they do this, that, and the other? We could know a lot about this team by week 4, just by the teams that they are playing.
I mean, you're the one who said it on this show that you think this team's going to get better as it goes along in the second half. They're going to be a pretty good team. And you pair that with the fact that most people saw this team going 1-4, maybe to start with, 1-5. If you get off to a 3-2 start, even, right? You beat the Falcons and maybe the Lions, it does change things. If Geno Smith plays like Alex Smith, this team has a chance to be competitive in just about every game they play this year. And you never know what's going to happen, because the NFC West might be down. There are question marks about every single team in this division now. And I don't know that we would have thought that a week and a half ago. I
am not faulting the Rams in any way, shape, or form to losing to the Bills, because the Bills, in my opinion, are going to the Super Bowl and probably winning the Super Bowl this year, unless they get decimated by injuries. That team is so well built. So I hate to fault the Rams too much for losing to the Bills, who are trying to prove a point. So I don't want to do that. And God, love Von Miller. But the Niners did not show up. Arizona is exactly who a lot of us thought they were going to be. Will that change when Hopkins comes back? Possibly. I don't know. But they also played the Chiefs, so we have to give them some credit there. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't want to put a fork in the NFC West quite yet, but I do think it is very possible in my mind now that the Seahawks are not in 4th place in this division, that they could easily be in 3rd or more, depending on what happens with San Francisco.
Before we wrap this up, let's talk about some bummer news. Jamal Adams, you mentioned it earlier. It sounds like we haven't gotten an official word yet. Mm-hmm. It sounds like a torn pec, or not a torn pec, a torn quad, which, there were some people in the stadium last night that were thinking it was ACL. When you looked at the play, it's hard to pinpoint exactly when he got hurt, but when he got up, you could see the instability in that left leg. And in that way, it looked like ACL, but he didn't even grab at the leg before he got up. So I almost wonder if the injury happened while he was getting up off the ground. I don't know. But a torn quad would have a 6 to 8 month. He'd be out for the year.
Yeah.
It would be the third straight year that he's played a handful of games, that he hasn't been durable, that he's been out for the season. And all those injuries have happened early last year and this year. There were already people in the stands saying, and I've seen it online today. What a terrible trade. What a waste. Cut him, release him. He's away. What's your general feelings about Jamal Adams once again having to miss a season?
When they picked up Jamal Adams, I was ecstatic. He is the type of player that I love. He's explosive. You never know where he's coming from. He's super talented. I don't think, and I kind of preached this from the mountaintops, you cannot judge this trade on his injuries because you don't know about injuries when you make the trade. They were trading for the all-pro player. And so that to me, and people can be pissy about the trade all they want to, that you cannot see the future. It breaks my heart for Jamal Adams because he is out there for blood. He wants to make his statement. And so this kills me. That injury is pretty severe. And so with his hand and now this, does he continue to play? I think he'll try to. Should he? No, probably not. And so I don't know what Seattle will do with him next year, especially, and I'm pretty sure he'll be out for the season. I think there's like a 99% chance of that. And so I don't know what Seattle will do with him next year, but it just kills me because I know the type of player he can be, and you can't fault the player for injuries. They just happen, especially one like a torn quad. That's weird. That's a real weird injury.
Yeah. And again, it just looked fluky in the way it happened. He even tried running off the field at one point, and then the leg just buckled on him. It is a shame. And I think people forget about the player and they forget about the human being when things like that happen. Nobody wants to prove his worth more than Jamal Adams. The competitiveness of that guy is one of the reasons they went out and acquired him. It's one of the things that has made him a great player. He hears the doubters and the naysayers that say we wasted 2 first-round draft picks. We should have never made the trade. And I'm with you. You can never really look at those things in full hindsight. And also, people like to take one side or the other and make things black and white. I didn't like the process, right? I didn't think the Seahawks were one player away from being a Super Bowl contender, which is where you'd hope a roster would be if you're going to trade 2 first-round draft picks to go get a guy like the Broncos just did to get Russell Wilson. They thought they were a quarterback away from being a contender. Were we a box safety away from being a Super Bowl contender? No. So I didn't like that. But I still got excited about the player. Mm-hmm. He's on our roster, and I like him. And there was no question about his ability. It's a shame. They've proven they can be effective without him. In some ways, it allows them to play a little bit of a different style now and be a little more conservative on the back end, which tends to be Pete Carroll's history. We've got that depth we talked about. Josh Jones and Ryan Neal have both proven they can play in the box, are big enough to play in the box and can be effective in coverage. And we still have Quandre Diggs back there. And he looked, by the way, we haven't even mentioned him. He had the interception in the end zone he dropped, but for a guy who had an injury at the end of last year that looked gruesome at the time, he looked 100% healthy, running around, flying around, hitting people. That was fun to watch. I think they can absorb this loss, and we might not even notice it much on the field. And then as the eternal optimist, I look at it this way. Because I checked his contract. Can't really get out of it in 2023. You're stuck with it. 2024, you can. I think it's like a $11 million dead money, or it's $11 million cap savings without as much dead money. But if they were to cut him in 2023, it's like $24 million dead money.
Right.
So
he's not going anywhere for a couple of years, for sure.
No, you're not going to do that. But because it happened in the first game, it's a 6 to 8 month recovery. Now he gets a chance to heal everything because he was playing with a broken hand still. He had those 2 fingers fused, and then he broke it again, hitting it on someone's helmet in the first practice of the training camp, I think, or first or second practice. Now he can go, and he's still just coming off shoulder surgery this last offseason too. He can go heal all of it. Come back in 2023 with a team that should be much closer to being a contender, and be a factor next year and be 100% healthy. It's just a shame that we had to see it so early on. Overall, though, I don't know that we suffered any other serious injuries. Cody Barton was shaken up, but he came in at the end of the game. Mm-hmm. Woolen was shaken up, came back in. Mm-hmm. Am I missing anything? I don't
I
think we
don't
had any.
think so. Nothing serious anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that's good news to
Right.
get out of an opener with only one major injury is probably a good thing in this league.
Yeah, especially when those starters never played in the preseason. So, you expect more of those pins to drop, and they just didn't. And so I think this team is ready. I think that they got what they wanted last night. They showed the world what they can do. We just now need to see the consistency. It's going to be an exciting year.
Well, it is, and it should be an exciting week 2 at San Francisco against the 49ers and Trey Lance. We'll see what he's all about. Dayna, thanks for joining me. And
Absolutely.
thanks for pulling an all-nighter, and hopefully you'll get some rest today. What do you got coming up on the show in a couple days later this week?
So my Field Goals podcast, I'm really excited. I am bringing in fan favorite Josh Cashman, better known as Cable Thanos, is going to join me. We're going to talk a little bit about his history and how his videos blew up. We're also going to talk about the fact that he worked for Russell Wilson for a little while. So we're going to have a little conversation about that. And then he's got some great insights about this team. So it should be a fun show.
Looking forward to that. Also later this week, Rob Guerrera, who hosts the Niners Nation podcast, will be joining me to preview the game and give kind of the angle on how Niners Nation is feeling about what happened in Chicago and what they saw from the Seahawks on Monday night and what they expect at Levi Stadium in week 2. That's going to do it for us. I'm Dan Viennes. That's Dayna O'Gorman, Dayna OG on Twitter. You can find me at Seahawks Forever. And subscribe to the podcast on whichever platform you use so you get notification of new episodes. And you'll hear from Dayna in just a couple of days. We'll talk to you soon. And cool.
Yeah. Josh and I are actually going to record today. I think I'm going to have it come out tomorrow, though. So that'll be fun.
Yeah. He's does he still work for Russell?
No. The minute Russell was traded, they were done. They got it. Yeah, it was a whole thing. So, but, understandably so. I mean, they were kind of based all over, but yeah.
I didn't get into Russell's post game, but did you watch any of that? Like him?
I did watch it.
So weird. It was the weirdest I've ever seen him. Like that whole
I think
soundbite where he's like, "People are gonna hate you," and he kind of did that little
right. You know what I wanted from him so badly, and this is just me as a fan, is I wanted him to acknowledge that the 12s got to him. Not necessarily like mentally, but just saying, you know what? That's why I loved this fan base, is because they know how to do a job and they're always competing and blah, 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 blah. I wanted him to give it and acknowledge it instead of, oh, well, they don't like me now. You know what I mean? It just seemed kind of.
Yeah, he didn't say anything like that. He could have said, wow, no, I found out what it's like to be on the other side.
Right. And he did say that, and he gave a nod to a lot of players, including Doug Baldwin, which I thought was really interesting. But so it was
just the fact Doug was there. Like he hasn't been around the program much the last few years because
everyone was there. I mean, Jim Zorn was there, for God's sake. Like everyone was there. And I think that that's great. And there are some people who are like, oh, the Seahawks are trying to make sure the fan base are happy. Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are. And that's their job. And so good for them.
Yeah. All right. I look forward to hearing your show with Josh.
Oh, thanks.
We'll talk next week.
We'll talk later. All right. See you later.
See ya. And boom. Dun, dun.